He was just a struggling mechanic with a mountain of bills and a son to raise when fate brought a stranded Rolls-Royce to his doorstep during the worst blizzard in decades. That night changed everything. What followed, no one could have predicted. Not the friendship, not the second chance, and certainly not the 8-figure investment that would transform his modest garage into something extraordinary. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The December wind howled through the gaps in the old garage. Doors, carrying with it pellets of ice that tapped against the corrugated metal roof like impatient fingers. Inside, Mike Reynolds hunched over the engine of a '98 Chevy, his calloused hands steady despite the biting cold. The space heater in the corner fought a losing battle against winter's assault, its orange glow barely reaching the far corners of what had once been his father's pride and joy, Reynolds Family Auto Repair. "Dad, I finished my homework," called a voice from the small office tucked behind the main workspace. "Can I help now?" Mike straightened, wincing as his back protested the sudden movement. At 38, his body had already begun cataloging the cost of 15 years bent over engines and crawling beneath chassis. "Just a minute, buddy," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. The office door swung open, and 11-year-old Tyler appeared, his school backpack still slung over one shoulder, dark hair falling across eyes that were too serious for a child his age. He'd grown so much this past year, in more ways than just height. "Math done too?" Mike asked, though he already knew the answer. Tyler never left anything half-finished. Not since Emma had left them 3 years ago, with nothing but a note on the kitchen counter and a void that neither of them quite knew how to fill. "Everything's done," Tyler confirmed, approaching the Chevy with the reverence of an apprentice. "Mrs. Donovan says I'm way ahead in science." Mike smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That's my boy, smart like you're." He caught himself before saying, "Mother." Some wounds were still too fresh to poke, even casually. "Smart like you always." "Ah," he corrected. "Grab that flashlight, would you? Let's see if we can get Mr. Peterson's truck running before this storm gets any worse." Tyler eagerly reached for the heavy-duty flashlight, his small face alight with purpose. These evening hours in the garage had become their ritual, sacred time where Mike could teach his son the trade while catching glimpses of the man he was slowly becoming. In the soft glow of work lights, surrounded by the comforting smell of motor oil and metal, they could almost pretend their family wasn't broken. Outside, the snow continued to fall in thick, relentless sheets, coating the rural Vermont landscape in a blanket of white. The local weather station had been warning about this storm for days. A nor'easter they were calling historic, threatening to dump over 2 feet of snow across the region. Most people had heeded the warnings, stocking up on supplies and hunkering down. Reynolds Auto Repair should have been closed hours ago, but Mike couldn't afford to miss even a day's work. Not with this month's mortgage payment already late, and Tyler's orthodontist bill still sitting on the counter, red stamped with "Final Notice." "Hand me that socket wrench," Mike said, pointing to the toolbox, the 5/8-inch. Tyler selected it without hesitation, his small face solemn with concentration. The boy had learned the tools faster than Mike could teach them, absorbing every lesson like his future depended on it. Perhaps, in his mind, it did. "You think we'll have to sleep here tonight?" Tyler asked, eyeing the worsening conditions through the grimy windows. The radio said the roads might close. Mike glanced up from the engine. "Nah, we'll make it home. This old truck just needs a new starter, then we'll lock up and head out before it gets too bad." He didn't mention that they lived just behind the garage in a small 2-bedroom house that had once been the property's storage shed. Home was only 100 yards away, but the gesture of optimism mattered. Tyler needed to believe his father had everything under control. The truth was more complicated. Reynolds Auto Repair was barely staying afloat. The newer garages in town had fancier equipment, younger mechanics, and sleek waiting rooms with coffee machines and Wi-Fi. Mike's place was a relic, honest work at fair prices, but increasingly invisible in a world that valued convenience over craftsmanship. Last month, he'd had to let go of Luis, his only employee, a decision that still kept him awake at night. A sudden gust of wind rattled the metal doors, making both of them jump. Then, cutting through the howl of the storm, came another sound, the distinctive rumble of an engine in distress, followed by the crunch of tires struggling through deep snow. "Someone's coming," Tyler said, already moving toward the front of the garage. Mike followed, wiping his hands again on the stained rag. Through the windows, he could make out headlights piercing the whiteout conditions, moving slowly up the driveway. Not just any headlights, round, perfectly spaced, mounted on what appeared to be... No, it couldn't be. "Is that a Rolls-Royce?" Tyler whispered, pressing his face against the cold glass. Mike squinted through the snow. "Stay here," he said, grabbing his heavy canvas jacket from the hook by the door. He pushed against the side entrance, the wind immediately slapping him with icy particles that stung his exposed skin. The vehicle had stopped about 20 feet from the garage, its legendary Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament barely visible through the blizzard. It was indeed a Rolls-Royce, not just any model, but a vintage Silver Cloud II, gleaming midnight blue even under layers of snow. Mike approached cautiously, wondering what kind of person would drive such a car in these conditions. His question was answered when the driver's door opened, and a woman emerged, wrapped in what appeared to be a cashmere coat, her high-heeled boots immediately sinking into 6 inches of fresh powder. She staggered slightly, catching herself against the car door. "Are you open?" she called over the wind, her voice carrying a crisp authority that seemed to cut through the storm itself. Mike found himself nodding before he'd even processed the question. "Yes, ma'am. Reynolds Auto Repair. You having trouble?" The woman took a tentative step forward, then another, clearly struggling with the terrain. Without thinking, Mike moved to help her, offering his arm for support. She hesitated for just a moment before accepting, her gloved hand gripping his forearm with surprising strength. "Engine started making a terrible noise about 2 miles back," she explained, as they made their way toward the garage. "Then everything just stopped. I managed to coast down the hill, saw your lights. You were the only place open." Up close, Mike could see she was probably in her mid-40s, with sharp features softened by laugh lines around her eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, now slightly disheveled from the wind. Despite the circumstances, she carried herself with a poise that spoke of boardrooms and corner offices. "I'm Mike Reynolds," he said, guiding her through the side door into the relative warmth of the garage. "This is my son, Tyler." The boy stood awkwardly by the workbench, eyes wide as he took in their unexpected visitor. "Catherine Blackwell," she replied, brushing snow from her coat with an efficient sweep of her hands. Her gaze traveled around the garage, taking in the old equipment, the concrete floor stained with decades of oil and grease, the wall of hand tools meticulously organized on a pegboard. If she was judging, her face revealed nothing. "Ms. Blackwell," Mike acknowledged, immediately recognizing the name. Catherine Blackwell was the CEO of Blackwell Innovations, a tech company that had started in Boston and now had offices in 16 countries. Her face occasionally appeared in the business section of the papers, associated with headlines about revolutionary medical devices and record-breaking quarters. What she was doing in their small Vermont town during a blizzard was beyond his comprehension. "You know who I am," she stated rather than asked, removing her gloves. Mike shrugged. "I read the papers, but right now, You're just someone with car trouble during a bad storm. Let me take a look at what we're dealing with." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, before she nodded. "Fair enough. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Mike turned to Tyler. "Get Miss Blackwell a coffee, would you? There's a fresh pot in the office." "Just Catherine, please," she said, following Tyler toward the small room. "And if you have tea instead, I'd prefer that." Mike pulled on his work jacket and braced himself for another confrontation with the elements. Outside, the storm had intensified, visibility reduced to just a few feet. He trudged toward the Rolls-Royce, a vehicle he'd only ever seen in magazines and movies. The Silver Cloud 2 was automotive royalty, handcrafted in the late 1950s with a 6.2-liter V8 engine that purred like a contented lion when properly maintained. Only about 2,500 were ever made. This one, despite its current state of distress, was immaculate. Clearly the prized possession of someone who understood its value. Popping the hood was like opening the door to a different era of craftsmanship. Even in the harsh weather, Mike couldn't help but pause to admire the engineering. Then he got to work, examining the engine with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent his life speaking the language of machines. It took only a few minutes to identify the problem: a broken timing belt, likely due to the extreme cold, fixable, but not quickly, and not without the right parts. When he returned to the garage, Catherine was seated in the office's lone visitor chair, holding a mug of what smelled like the peppermint tea his late mother had kept for special occasions. Tyler sat on the edge of the desk, animatedly explaining something about the classic motorcycle engine Mike had been restoring in his spare time. "And Dad says when it's finished, I can sit on it for a picture, but not ride it until I'm 16, which is forever away. But I'm saving up for my own motorcycle someday anyway," Tyler was saying, his earlier shyness apparently forgotten. Catherine was listening with genuine interest, her head slightly tilted, attention fully on the boy, as if he were a valued colleague presenting quarterly reports. She looked up when Mike entered, raising an eyebrow in question. "It's your timing belt," he said, running a hand through his snow-dampened hair. "Snapped clean through. It's not an easy fix, especially for that model. I'd need to order the part, and with this storm." He gestured toward the windows, where the outside world had disappeared into a canvas of swirling white. Catherine set down her mug. "How long?" "Under normal circumstances, 3 days minimum. But with the roads like this and holiday shipping delays, could be a week, maybe more." She closed her eyes briefly, the first sign of vulnerability she'd displayed. "I see. And I assume there's no rental agency in this town." "Nearest one's in Burlington, 40 miles north," Mike confirmed. "And they'll be closed now, storm or no storm." "Is there a hotel nearby where I could wait it out?" Tyler looked at Mike, then back at Catherine. "The Pinewood Inn is just down the road, but they close for renovations every winter. The place is Dottie's bed and breakfast, and she's visiting her daughter in Florida until January." Catherine's composure slipped further. "I see," she repeated, though it was clear she didn't see at all, didn't see how she could be stranded in a town too small to appear on most maps, with no transportation, no accommodation, and a storm that had local meteorologists using words like unprecedented and state of emergency. Mike found himself speaking before he'd fully thought through the implications. "We have a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and clean. You're welcome to stay until we can figure something out." The offer hung in the air between them, Under normal circumstances, it would have been inappropriate. A strange man inviting a woman he'd just met to stay in his home. But these weren't normal circumstances, and something about Catherine Blackwell's presence in their garage already felt like a deviation from the ordinary course of things. She studied him, her gaze direct and assessing. Mike had the distinct impression she was running calculations, weighing variables, evaluating risk factors. "You're a mechanic," she said finally. "Yes, Mom, 3rd generation. And you can fix my car. Given time and parts, yes." "You're certain?" He nodded. "I've never met an engine I couldn't fix." Another moment of consideration then. "Very well, Mr. Reynolds. It seems I don't have many options. I accept your offer of accommodation. Assuming you have internet access, I have a video conference at 8 a.m. tomorrow that can't be rescheduled." Mike and Tyler exchanged glances. "We have internet," Mike said carefully. "It's not the fastest, but it works most of the time." Catherine nodded once, decisive. "That will have to do. Now, what about my luggage?" By the time they'd retrieved Catherine's expensive leather suitcase from the trunk of the Rolls-Royce and closed up the garage, the storm had transformed from threatening to apocalyptic. The three of them fought their way through near whiteout conditions to reach the small house behind the garage, the wind howling like a living thing around them. Inside, Mike hastily lit the wood stove, while Tyler showed Catherine to the spare room, formerly his bedroom, before he'd insisted on moving to the converted attic space that he considered more grown up. "Bathroom's down the hall," Tyler explained, his voice carrying the careful politeness he reserved for parent-teacher conferences and doctor's appointments. "The hot water takes a minute to come on, but there's plenty once it does." Mike could hear Catherine's measured response, thanking Tyler for the information. There was a gentleness in her tone that hadn't been present during their initial meeting, a softening that made him wonder if her corporate persona was just that, a persona. In the kitchen, he busied himself with dinner preparations, grateful that he'd stopped at Wilson's grocery on the way home from dropping Tyler at school that morning. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti with meat sauce and a bag of pre-washed salad, but it would have to do. The idea of Catherine Blackwell, who probably dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, eating his simple cooking, made his stomach tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Can I help?" He turned to find her standing in the doorway, her coat and boots exchanged for a simple black sweater and pants that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Without the outerwear and the authority of the garage setting, she seemed smaller somehow, though no less formidable. "I'm just making spaghetti," he said, suddenly self-conscious of the worn countertops and the mismatched dishes drying in the rack. "Nothing special." "I like spaghetti," she replied, moving into the kitchen with the same decisive energy she'd displayed earlier. "I'll make the salad." Before he could protest, she was opening drawers and cabinets, locating a bowl, a knife, a cutting board, making herself at home in his space with an ease that was both disconcerting and strangely comfortable. Tyler wandered in a few minutes later, his eyes widening at the sight of their guest efficiently chopping the cucumber Mike had almost forgotten they had. "Dad never uses those," he said, pointing to the vegetables she was preparing. "He says they're just for decoration." Catherine's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Is that so?" Mike felt his face warm. "I use them," he protested weakly. "Sometimes." "When Mom left, we ate pizza for 2 weeks straight," Tyler announced with the brutal honesty of childhood, unaware of how the words landed like blows. "Then, Dad learned to cook from YouTube videos. He's actually pretty good now." A heavy silence followed. Catherine's knife paused mid-slice, then resumed with deliberate precision. "Self-taught skills are often the most valuable," she said after a moment, her voice neutral. "My father never allowed prepared food in our house. I learned to cook before I could multiply fractions." The simple revelation This glimpse into her past shifted something in the atmosphere. Mike found himself relaxing slightly, remembering that beneath her impressive title and intimidating reputation, Catherine Blackwell was just a person stranded in a snowstorm, making salad in his kitchen while his son chattered about pizza. Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Tyler dominated the conversation, jumping from topic to topic with the boundless energy of youth. He told Catherine about his science project on renewable energy, his position as goalkeeper on the school soccer team, and his collection of vintage car models that he and Mike assembled on rainy weekends. She listened attentively, asking questions that revealed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. "And what about you, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked during a rare lull. "Has Reynolds Auto Repair always been your plan?" Mike twirled pasta around his fork, considering. "It was my father's garage before it was mine, and his father's before that. I grew up there, learned to change oil before I learned to ride a bike. So yes, in a way, it was always the plan." "But not the dream," she observed, her gaze sharp. He looked up, startled by her perception. "The dream was to expand, modernize. My father was old school, believed in fixing things to last. But the industry's changed. People want convenience, warranties, loaner cars while they wait. I always thought we could adapt without losing what made us special." "Why didn't you?" The question was direct, unembellished by politeness. Normally, Mike might have deflected, but something about the storm raging outside and this unexpected dinner companion made honesty feel appropriate. "Money," he said simply. "Dad got sick my senior year of college, cancer. I came home to help run the place, thinking it would be temporary. By the time he passed, I had a wife and mortgage, and the medical bills." He shrugged. "Dreams got put on hold. Then the recession hit, and it was just about surviving." Catherine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And your wife?" Tyler looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by a piece of cucumber. "Emma decided small-town life wasn't for her," Mike said carefully, conscious of his son's presence. "We divorced 3 years ago." Something flickered in Catherine's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "I'm sorry," she said, and it sounded genuine. "Don't be," Mike replied, reaching out to ruffle Tyler's hair. "We're doing just fine, aren't we, buddy?" Tyler smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, we're good." After dinner, Tyler insisted on showing Catherine his collection of model cars, carefully arranged on shelves in the attic bedroom. Mike could hear their voices drifting down the stairs as he washed dishes, his son's excited explanations punctuated by Catherine's thoughtful questions. There was something surreal about having Catherine Blackwell, whose net worth was reported to be somewhere north of $3 billion, admiring die-cast replicas in his son's bedroom while a historic blizzard raged outside. When they came back downstairs, Tyler was yawning despite his obvious excitement. "Bedtime, champ," Mike said, noting that it was already past 9. "School might be cancelled tomorrow, but that's no reason to throw off your schedule." Tyler started to protest, then thought better of it. "Okay. Good night, Dad." He turned to Catherine. "Good night, Miss Blackwell. Thanks for looking at my cars." "Catherine," she reminded him gently, "and thank you for showing them to me. That 1965 Mustang is quite special." Tyler beamed. "Dad found it at a yard sale. It was all broken, but we fixed it together." "You did most of the work," Mike corrected, pride evident in his voice. After Tyler had disappeared upstairs, Mike and Catherine found themselves alone. In the living room, the silence punctuated only by the occasional crack from the wood stove and the constant howl of the wind. Through the windows, they could see nothing but darkness and swirling snow, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. "Your son is remarkable," Catherine said, settling into the worn armchair beside the bookshelf. "Very bright." "He's everything," Mike replied simply, adding another log to the fire. Gets his brains from his mother. She is brilliant. English professor. Catherine tilted her head. But he has your hands. I noticed in the garage. The way he handled the tools, that's not learned, that's inherited. The observation, so specific and yet so perceptive, caught Mike off guard. You know about cars? A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. I know about people and about inheritance, what we receive from those who came before us, whether we want it or not. She glanced around the modest living room, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the bookshelf filled with well-worn paperbacks and service. Manuals, the hand-knitted Afghan draped over the back of the couch. Your home has character, history. It's nothing compared to what you're used to, I'm sure. No, she agreed, surprising him with her candor, but that doesn't make it less valuable. Mike studied her, trying to reconcile the Forbes list CEO with the woman sitting in his living room, warming her hands around a mug of tea. Can I ask what brings you to our little corner of nowhere in the middle of a blizzard, in a vintage Rolls-Royce, no less? Catherine was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. The car was my father's, she said finally. He passed, away last month, heart attack at 74, still at his desk. Her voice held no obvious emotion, but her fingers tightened around the mug. He kept the rolls at our family home in Stowe. I was driving it back to Boston. Thought I'd take the scenic route. Clearly, that was a miscalculation. I'm sorry about your father, Mike said, meaning it. She acknowledged the sentiment with a slight nod. We had a complicated relationship. He built Blackwell Innovations from nothing, expected me to preserve his legacy exactly as he envisioned it. We didn't always agree on what that meant. But you took over the company. I did, and I've quadrupled its value in the last decade, expanded into markets he never considered, pushed innovation beyond what he thought possible. There was no boasting in her tone, just a statement of fact. He never said he was proud, but him kept me as CEO. That was his version of approval. The revelation hung in the air between them, this shared understanding of complicated parental relationships, of legacies both honored and reshaped. The car, though, Mike said, remembering the gleaming Rolls-Royce now covered in snow outside his garage. It's in incredible condition. Something softened in Catherine's expression. That car was the one thing he truly loved besides the company. He bought it when he made his first million, restored it himself. Taught me how engines work while he was under the hood of that car. She met Mike's gaze directly. That's why I knew you were telling the truth in the garage. When you said you've never met an engine you couldn't fix, I recognized the certainty. It's the same way my father used to talk. The comparison startled him, the idea that he shared anything with the father of Catherine Blackwell, tech mogul and industry titan. I'll take good care of it, he promised. As soon as the storm passes, I'll order the parts, make it right. I know you will. She set down her mug and stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her pants. I should try to get some sleep. That video conference won't reschedule itself, storm or no storm. Mike nodded, suddenly aware of how intimate the evening had become, sharing meals and memories with a stranger who didn't feel quite like a stranger anymore. Of course, if you need anything during the night, Tyler and I are just upstairs. The house gets cold, so there are extra blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. Thank you, Mike, she said, using his first name for the first time. For dinner, for the room, for all of it. Anyone would have done the same, he replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Catherine paused at the door to the spare room, her hand resting on the old brass knob. No, she said quietly. They wouldn't have. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Mike stood in the living room for a long time after she'd gone, listening to the storm and wondering what twist of fate had brought Catherine Blackwell to his garage on this particular night. Outside, the blizzard showed no signs of abating, snow piling against the windows in drifts that would require hours of shoveling come morning. But inside, the house felt different somehow, as if a new possibility had entered with the snow-covered CEO and her broken Rolls-Royce. Eventually, he made his way upstairs, checking on Tyler, sound asleep, one arm thrown over his collection of car magazines, before collapsing into his own bed. The events of the day played through his mind like scenes from someone else's life. The storm, the silver cloud appearing like an apparition through the snow, Catherine Blackwell standing in his kitchen, chopping vegetables with the precision of someone who leaves nothing to chance. Just as he was drifting off, his phone buzzed with a weather alert. Historic blizzard conditions to continue for the next 36-48 hours. Travel impossible. Residents advised to shelter in place. Mike set the phone aside and closed his eyes, oddly comforted by the knowledge that for at least the next 2 days, the world had narrowed to just this: his home, his son, and their unexpected guest, isolated together in a cocoon of snow and circumstance. Sometimes, he thought as sleep finally claimed him, the most important journeys begin with a breakdown. Mike awoke to the sound of quiet conversation drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, he lay still, disoriented by the grey light filtering through his bedroom window. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. The storm, the Rolls-Royce, Catherine Blackwell sitting at his kitchen table. He glanced at the clock, 7:15 a.m. He dressed quickly and made his way downstairs, following the voices to the kitchen. There he found Catherine and Tyler, both fully dressed, huddled over Tyler's laptop at the table. Catherine wore the same black sweater as the night before, but her hair was neatly twisted into a bun, her posture impeccable despite the early hour and rustic surroundings. Tyler was explaining something about the Wi-Fi router, his small hands gesturing animatedly. "Morning," Mike said, hovering in the doorway. They both looked up. Tyler grinned. "Dad! School's cancelled. The whole county is shut down." "I'm not surprised," Mike replied, moving to the window. Outside, the world had disappeared beneath a blanket of white. Snow drifts piled against the sides of the house, reaching nearly to the window sills. The garage was barely visible through the continuing snowfall. "Looks like we got at least 2 feet overnight, and it's still coming down." Catherine nodded, her expression unreadable. "I've been trying to access my email, but your internet connection is temperamental." "Sorry about that," Mike said, heading for the coffee maker. "It's satellite. Gets worse in bad weather." "Tyler's been very helpful in troubleshooting," she said, with a small nod toward his son. "He's quite resourceful." Tyler beamed under the praise. "I told Ms. Blackwell, I mean Catherine, that we could try using the signal booster Mrs. Perez gave us when her grandson visited last summer." Mike raised an eyebrow, impressed by his son's recall. "Good thinking, bud. It's in the mudroom cabinet, I think." As Tyler darted off to find it, Mike poured coffee into 2 mugs. "Black, right?" he asked, remembering how she'd taken it in the garage. Catherine looked surprised. "Yes, thank you." She accepted the mug, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "Your son is an early riser. Always has been. Makes getting him to school on time the only easy part of the morning." Mike leaned against the counter, studying their unexpected guest. In the clear light of morning, Catherine Blackwell looked, somehow both more and less formidable than she had the previous night. More because even in this humble kitchen, her presence commanded attention. Less because there was a hint of vulnerability in the way she cradled the coffee mug, as if drawing warmth not just from the beverage, but from the simple human act of being offered it. "My video conference is in 40 minutes, she said, glancing. At her watch, a sleek, understated timepiece that probably cost more than Mike's truck. If we can't stabilize the connection, I'll need to reschedule. The storm's supposed to last through tomorrow, Mike said. Internet might not improve much. She considered this, fingers tapping lightly against the ceramic mug. Then I'll have to work with what we have. Our Tokyo division is waiting on approval for a manufacturing change. Delaying could cost millions. The casual way she referenced such figures, millions, as if discussing the weather, highlighted the vast gulf between their worlds. Mike made about $42,000 in a good year, and his business was barely breaking even. Catherine Blackwell probably made decisions involving sums larger than his lifetime earnings before her morning coffee. Tyler returned with the signal booster, triumphantly holding the small white device aloft. Found it! It was behind Dad's fishing tackle. For the next half hour, the three of them worked to improve the internet connection, moving the router, repositioning the booster, and even venturing onto the porch, bundled against the cold, to adjust the satellite dish. By 7:55 a.m. they'd managed to establish a somewhat stable connection, not ideal, but hopefully sufficient for Catherine's needs. "I need privacy for this call," she said, glancing around the small house. "You can use my office at the garage," Mike offered. "It's not fancy, but it has a door that closes." Catherine nodded gratefully. That would be perfect. The journey from the house to the garage, normally a 30-second walk, became an expedition. Mike went first, breaking a path through snow that reached past his knees in places. Catherine followed in his footsteps, her borrowed winter boots, Mike's stuffed with extra socks, crunching through the crusty top layer. The wind had died down, but the snow continued to fall in large, lazy flakes that caught in their hair and eyelashes. "This is quite the storm," Catherine remarked, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. Mike nodded, pushing forward. "Worst I've seen in maybe 15 years. The blizzard of '09 was the last one that shut down the county like this." Inside the garage, the temperature was only marginally warmer than outside. Mike quickly fired up the space heaters while Catherine stomped snow from her boots. "There's a lap blanket in the bottom drawer of the desk," he said, leading her to the cramped office. "And the space heater in here works pretty well. Should warm up in 10 minutes or so." Catherine surveyed the small room, taking in the metal desk cluttered with invoices and parts catalogs, the ancient office chair with duct tape patching one armrest, the faded calendar on the wall featuring classic cars from the 1950s. For a moment, Mike saw his workspace through her eyes, shabby, outdated, a far cry from the gleaming executive suite she undoubtedly commanded at Blackwell Innovations. But when she spoke, there was no judgment in her voice. "This will work fine," she said simply. "Thank you." Mike nodded, suddenly awkward. "I'll leave you to it then. Tyler and I will be in the garage. I thought I'd take a look at your car, see if there's anything else that needs attention besides the timing belt." "I'd appreciate that," Catherine replied, already setting up her laptop on the desk. Mike retreated, closing the office door behind him. In the main area of the garage, Tyler had already donned his work apron, a miniature version of Mike's, with Reynolds stitched across the top, and was organizing tools on the workbench. "Can we look at the Rolls-Royce, Dad? Please?" His eyes shone with excitement. "I've never seen one up close before." Mike smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That's the plan, buddy. But first, we need to clear a path to get it into the garage. Can't work on it properly out in the snow." For the next hour, they shoveled. The massive garage doors, usually rolled up with the push of a button, had to be manually cleared of drifts that had accumulated along the bottom edge. They worked steadily, Mike doing the heavy lifting, while Tyler tackled the finer details, sweeping snow from the concrete apron where the Rolls-Royce would need to be parked. By the time they managed to open the doors and clear a path to the stranded vehicle, they were both red-faced and breathing hard, but satisfied with their efforts. The Rolls-Royce sat like a sleeping beast under its blanket of snow. Only the distinctive grille and spirit of ecstasy hood ornament identifying it as automotive royalty. "Now for the hard part," Mike said, handing Tyler a soft, bristled brush. "We need to get all this snow off without scratching the paint. This isn't Mr. Peterson's farm truck. Every inch of this car is worth more than most people make in a month." Together, they carefully cleared the snow, revealing the Rolls-Royce's midnight blue exterior, inch by precious inch. Despite the circumstances of its arrival, the car was immaculate, a testament to decades of meticulous care. The Silver Cloud II had been produced for only 3 years in the early 1960s, making it not just luxury transportation, but a piece of automotive history. "It's beautiful," Tyler whispered, standing back to admire their work. Mike nodded, running a gloved hand reverently along the vehicle's sweeping fender. This model had a 6 2-liter V8 engine, revolutionary for its time. They were all hand-assembled in England, no assembly line, no robots. Just skilled craftsmen putting their hearts into every detail. "Like you do," Tyler said simply. The comparison startled Mike. He'd never considered his work in the same category as the artisans who created such masterpieces. Yet there was truth in Tyler's observation, the same dedication to quality, the same refusal to cut corners, the same satisfaction in making something work exactly as it should. "Let's get her inside," Mike said, his voice a little gruff with unexpected emotion. Moving the Rolls-Royce proved challenging. With its engine inoperable, they had to rely on the garage's ancient tow rig, carefully positioning the luxury vehicle over the cleared path. The job required precision and patience, qualities Mike had in abundance when it came to his work. Once the car was safely inside the garage, doors closed against the continuing snowfall, Mike popped the hood and began his inspection. Tyler stood beside him on a step stool, flashlight in hand, directing the beam exactly where Mike needed it without being told. "The timing belt is definitely the main issue," Mike confirmed after a thorough examination. "But there's more going. On here, the carburetor needs adjustment, and these fuel lines should be replaced before they become a problem. The radiator hose is showing early signs of cracking too." "Can we fix all that?" Tyler asked. Mike considered, mentally cataloging the parts he would need. Most were not items he kept in stock, especially for a vehicle as rare as this one. Some of it, yes. The bigger stuff will have to wait until we can get parts delivered. Who could be a while with the storm, Tyler noted, showing his usual perceptiveness. Mike nodded. "Exactly, but we can at least address the carburetor issue today. Hand me the 916 wrench, would you?" They were deep in the engine compartment when the office door opened. Catherine stepped out, her face tight with tension. The video conference had clearly not gone as smoothly as she'd hoped. "Connection dropped 3 times, she said tersely, rubbing her temples. "And Tokyo had questions I couldn't answer without access to my files." "I'm sorry," Mike said, straightening up and wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Satellite internet's unreliable in good weather. In a blizzard like this." He shrugged, apologetically. Catherine nodded, her frustration visibly giving way to resignation. "It's not your fault. We'll have to make adjustments." She glanced at the Rolls-Royce, now positioned in the center of the garage. "I see you've brought her in. Dad says we can fix the carburetor today," Tyler piped up, "but we'll need special parts for the other stuff." Catherine moved closer, her eyes taking in the open hood, the exposed engine, the organized array of tools laid out on the workbench. "My father would spend entire weekends working on this car," she said quietly. "It was his escape from the pressures of running the company. He said machines made more sense than people. They only failed when something was genuinely wrong, not because of emotions or politics." Mike smiled slightly. "Smart man. Engines don't lie, don't hold grudges, don't change their minds. Fix what's broken, maintain what works, and they'll run forever. Is that your philosophy for life as well as cars? Catherine asked, a hint of genuine curiosity in her voice. Before Mike could answer, the radio on the workbench crackled to life with an emergency broadcast alert. All three of them turned toward the sound as the announcer's voice filled the garage. This is an emergency update from the National Weather Service. The winter storm warning for Windsor County and surrounding areas has been upgraded to a blizzard emergency. Authorities report multiple power outages throughout the region. Emergency services are operating at limited capacity. All residents are advised to remain indoors and prepare for potential extended service disruptions. Repeat, this is now a blizzard emergency. As if on cue, the lights in the garage flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging them into the dim grey light filtering through the snow-covered windows. Perfect timing, Mike muttered. Tyler, get the emergency kit from the storage room, please. Tyler nodded and disappeared into the darkness at the back of the garage. Catherine remained still, her expression calm despite the sudden loss of power. Does this happen often? She asked. Mike nodded. During bad storms, yeah. That's why we keep the landline and have backup systems. Backup systems, generator for essential equipment, wood stove for heat, stored water, non-perishable, food. Standard rural Vermont winter preparedness. He smiled wryly. We might not have reliable internet, but we know how to handle being off the grid. Tyler returned with a large plastic tote from which Mike extracted several battery-powered lanterns. Soon the garage was illuminated by their warm glow, creating pools of light that gave the space an almost cozy atmosphere despite the bitter cold pressing against the windows. What about the house? Catherine asked pragmatically. If the power's out, the heating system won't work. We've got a wood stove there too, Mike explained, checking his watch. But we should head back soon to get it going before the place gets too cold. Catherine glanced at the Rolls-Royce. What about your work? We made good progress. The rest can wait until tomorrow. Mike gestured toward the garage doors where snow continued to accumulate. Let's focus on staying warm and fed. Storm like this, power could be out for days. The journey back to the house was even more challenging than their earlier expedition. The snow had deepened considerably and the wind had picked up again, driving icy particles against their exposed skin. Inside, the house was already noticeably cooler, the electric heating system silenced by the power outage. Mike immediately set about building a fire in the wood stove. His hands worked automatically, arranging kindling and smaller logs in a pattern perfected over years of Vermont winters. Tyler disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a battery-operated radio, which he tuned to the emergency broadcast station. Catherine stood in the center of the living room, momentarily uncertain of her role in this unexpected domestic crisis. "How can I help?" she finally asked. Mike looked up from the wood stove, where flames were beginning to catch among the kindling. "There's a rack of firewood on the back porch. If you could bring in as much as you can carry, that would be great. We'll need to keep this going around the clock." She nodded and headed for the back door, pulling on Mike's spare coat as she went. Through the window, Mike watched as Catherine Blackwell, CEO of a global technology corporation, carefully selected logs from the woodpile, balancing them in her arms with obvious determination. There was something strangely compelling about seeing her engaged in such a basic, necessary task. This woman, who probably had staff to handle every aspect of her daily life, now personally gathering fuel to keep them from freezing. When she returned, cheeks flushed from the cold, arms laden with firewood, there was a different energy about her. A quiet satisfaction that reminded Mike of Tyler's expression when he successfully completed a difficult task in the garage. "This should last a while. she said, setting the logs in the metal rack beside the wood stove. A few pieces of bark had stuck to her borrowed sweater, and a smudge of dirt marked one cheek, but she seemed unconcerned with these imperfections. "Thanks," Mike said, adding another log to the growing fire. "Fire should warm the main living area pretty well. Bedrooms will be colder, but we have plenty of blankets. I once spent a week in an unheated cabin in northern Sweden during a product testing phase," Catherine remarked, rubbing her hands together near the stove's growing warmth. -20 degrees outside. The engineers wanted to see if our medical devices could function in extreme conditions. "Did they?" Tyler asked, clearly fascinated by this glimpse into her world. "Eventually," she said with a small smile. "After some significant redesigns that I insisted on implementing myself. The team thought I was being unnecessarily hands-on, but I needed to understand the problems firsthand. That's how Dad works too," Tyler said, glancing proudly at his father. "He says you can't fix what you don't understand." Something flickered in Catherine's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or unexpected respect. "Your father is a wise man." As the day progressed, the three of them fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Mike took inventory of their food supplies, organizing meals that could be prepared without electricity. Tyler kept the radio tuned to emergency updates, reporting that power restoration efforts were hampered by continuing snowfall and downed trees. Catherine, after a brief call to her assistant on the landline, the only working phone, seemed to accept their situation with remarkable equanimity. By mid-afternoon, the house was reasonably warm in the main living areas. The wood stove radiated steady heat, its glass door revealing dancing flames that cast flickering shadows across the room. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. Snow continued to fall, accumulating in drifts that now reached the windowsills, effectively insulating the lower portions of the house. "Power company says it could be 3 days," Tyler announced, returning from his latest check of the radio. "They can't get crews into our area until the main roads are cleared." Mike nodded, unsurprised. "That's about what I expected. We'll be fine as long as the woodpile holds out and the pipes don't freeze." Catherine looked up from the notebook, where she'd been jotting ideas for the Tokyo project, apparently determined to work despite the circumstances. 3 days, she repeated thoughtfully. "I have meetings scheduled in Boston on Friday." "Friday's still 3 days away," Mike pointed out. "A lot can change by then, and even once the power's back, your car still needs parts that won't arrive until the roads are passable." She nodded, accepting this reality. "Then it seems I'm your guest for the duration." "You could have landed in worse places," Mike said with a slight smile. "We've got food, heat, and decent company. And board games," Tyler added enthusiastically. "Can we play Monopoly after dinner, Dad?" Mike laughed. "Sure, buddy. Just don't expect me to go easy on you this time." Catherine closed her notebook, her expression softening. "I haven't played Monopoly in years, not since business school, actually." "You should join us," Tyler said, already heading for the hallway closet where the games were stored. "I bet you're really good at it." "That might be unfair," she replied, with the first genuine smile Mike had seen from her. "I do run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Dad always says real-life experience counts," Tyler called over his shoulder. "That's why he lets me practice on real cars instead of just toy ones." Dinner that night was a creative affair. Pasta cooked on the wood stove, topped with sauce from jars Mike had stored in the pantry, accompanied by canned vegetables. They ate at the kitchen table by lantern light, the unusual illumination casting a warm, intimate glow over the simple meal. "This is surprisingly good," Catherine remarked, twirling pasta around her fork. "I've had worse at 5-star restaurants." Mike shrugged. "Food tastes better when you're hungry, and when you've had to work a little to prepare it." "Is that another of your philosophies?" she asked, and there was no mockery in her tone. "Just experience," he replied, Appreciation grows in proportion to effort. That's true of most things worth having. After dinner, true to his word, Tyler set up the Monopoly board on the coffee table in the living room. The three of them settled. Around it, the wood stove crackling nearby, creating a scene of domestic tranquility that would have seemed impossible 24 hours earlier. "I should warn you," Catherine said, sorting through the property cards with practiced efficiency, "I'm extremely competitive." Mike laughed. "Somehow that doesn't surprise me." The game proceeded with unexpected hilarity. Catherine, true to her warning, played with strategic brilliance, quickly accumulating properties and building hotels with ruthless efficiency. Tyler, delight evident in his every move, held his own remarkably well, his natural intelligence compensating for his lack of experience. Mike found himself enjoying the unexpected evening far more than he could have anticipated. 2 hours later, with Catherine triumphant, though not by the margin she'd clearly expected, Tyler fighting off sleep despite his protests that he wasn't. Tired, and Mike comfortably resigned to his third-place finish, they began packing up the game. "That was fun," Catherine said, helping to sort the colorful money back into its proper slots in the box. "I'd forgotten how enjoyable simple entertainment can be." "What do you usually do for fun?" Tyler asked through a yawn. "When you're not running your company?" Catherine seemed momentarily stumped by the question. "I attend charitable events," she said finally. "Gallery openings, the occasional symphony." "But those are work things," Tyler persisted. "What do you do just for you?" The question hung in the air, unexpectedly weighty. Catherine's hands stilled over the game pieces, her expression thoughtful. "I used to restore antique clocks," she said after a long moment. "Small ones, carriage clocks mostly. I liked the precision of the mechanisms, the way all the tiny parts worked together in perfect harmony." She smiled faintly. "My father thought it was a waste of time. Said if I had energy to spare, I should put it into the company." "Did you stop because of him?" Mike asked quietly. She nodded. "After I became CEO, there never seemed to be enough hours in the day. The clocks got packed away somewhere. I haven't thought about them in years." The simple admission revealed more about Catherine Blackwell than perhaps she intended. A glimpse of the person behind the professional facade, someone who once found joy in bringing broken things back to life, in understanding intricate systems and making them work again. Not so different, Mike realized, from what he did every day in the garage. "You should start again," Tyler said, with the straightforward wisdom of childhood. "Dad always says hobbies keep your brain healthy." Catherine smiled at him, something warm and genuine in her expression. "Your father seems to have quite the collection of wise sayings." "He's the smartest person I know," Tyler said loyally, leaning against Mike's shoulder as another yawn overcame him. Mike ruffled his son's, hair heart swelling with love and pride. "I think it's bedtime for you, champ. It's been a long day." "But it's still early," Tyler protested weakly, even as his eyelids drooped. "And tomorrow will be here before you know it," Mike countered, standing and extending a hand to pull his son to his feet. "Besides, we need to check the pipes and add more wood to the stove before we all turn in." After ensuring Tyler was settled with extra blankets in his attic bedroom, Mike returned to the living room to find Catherine standing by the window, gazing out at the storm. The lantern light caught the silver threads in her dark hair, illuminating her profile against the darkness beyond the glass. "Your son is extraordinary," she said without turning. "Perceptive, intelligent, kind. You've done well with him." "He makes it easy," Mike replied, moving to stand beside her. "Even after his mom left, he never lost his. Goodness, I worried he'd become bitter, but he just keeps finding reasons to be happy." Catherine nodded slowly. Children are remarkably resilient, more so than adults sometimes. There was something in her voice, a subtle shift in tone, that hinted at personal knowledge rather than general observation. Mike studied her profile, wondering about the life that had shaped her into the woman standing in his living room, so far from the world she typically inhabited. "Did you ever want children?" he asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. "Sorry, that's none of my business." But Catherine didn't seem offended. "I thought about it," she said, her gaze still fixed on the swirling snow beyond the window. "But the timing never seemed right. My career was always the priority. And then suddenly, I was 45 with a corner office and no one to go home to." She turned to face him. "Do you regret it? Having a family young before your career was established?" Mike didn't hesitate. Not for a second, even with everything that happened with Emma, even with the struggles. "Tyler is the best thing in my life. Nothing else comes close." She nodded, accepting his answer without comment. The silence between them was comfortable, contemplative. "It's strange," she said finally. 24 hours ago I was driving to Boston, focused on quarterly projections and manufacturing issues. Now I'm standing in a power outage darkened house in the middle of nowhere, playing board games and discussing life choices with a man I just met. She smiled slightly. If this were a movie, no one would believe the plot. Mike laughed. "Life has a way of throwing curveballs. Good mechanics learn to adapt." "Is that what you are?" she asked, something playful entering her tone. "A good mechanic? The best in 3 counties," he replied with mock seriousness. Then more genuinely, "At least I try to be. It's all anyone can do." Catherine's expression sobered. "My father used to say something similar. Excellence isn't optional, Catherine. It's the bare minimum." Sounds like a demanding man. He was, she agreed, but also brilliant, driven. He built Blackwell Innovations from nothing, just an idea and a small loan. By the time I took over, it was already a Fortune 500 company. "That's quite a legacy to inherit," Mike observed. "And to protect," she added, a hint of that earlier tension returning to her shoulders. "The board has been pushing for more aggressive expansion, acquisitions of smaller tech companies, outsourcing of manufacturing to cut costs, all the things my father opposed." "What do you think?" Mike asked, genuinely curious. Catherine considered the question with evident care. "I think growth for growth's sake is dangerous. Quality suffers. Innovation becomes secondary to quarterly profits, but standing still isn't an option either, not in our industry." She sighed. "It's a difficult balance to maintain." "Balance always is," Mike agreed, "in engines and in life." They fell silent again, watching as the snow continued its relentless descent, transforming the world outside into something unrecognizable, yet strangely beautiful. In that moment, despite the vast differences in their lives and circumstances, Mike felt an unexpected connection to Catherine Blackwell. A shared understanding of responsibility, of legacy, of trying to do the right thing in a world that often made that difficult. The wood stove crackled, sending a shower of sparks up the flue. The wind whispered around the eaves of the old house, and 2 people from entirely different worlds stood side by side in comfortable silence, watching the storm reshape everything outside while something indefinable shifted within. Morning arrived with a strange stillness. The howling wind that had been their constant companion for 2 days had finally subsided, leaving behind an eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional creaking of snow-laden branches. Mike woke before dawn from habit, padding quietly through the frigid house to stoke the wood stove before the temperature dropped any further. In the pale blue light filtering through frost-covered windows, the living room looked almost enchanted. Shadows playing across unfamiliar shapes, everyday objects transformed by the extraordinary circumstances. Mike added logs to the fire, coaxing flames from the embers, his breath visible in the cold air. "You're up early." He turned to find Catherine standing in the doorway, wrapped in the quilt from her bed. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her face bare of makeup, making her look somehow both younger and more vulnerable than she had the previous evening. "Force of habit," he replied, closing the wood stove door. "Used to start work at 5 when we had more business. Now, I just can't. Seem to sleep past dawn." She nodded, moving closer to the growing warmth of the fire. "I'm the same way. 5 a.m. conference calls with Asia, 6 a.m. strategy meetings. Sleep becomes a luxury rather than a necessity." "Coffee?" he offered. "I can make it on the wood stove. Might take longer than usual, but it'll work." "Please," she said. "I feel like my brain is operating at half capacity without it." While Mike filled a saucepan with water and ground coffee beans using a hand-crank grinder, Catherine took stock of their situation, peering through windows at the transformed landscape outside. "The snow has stopped," she observed, "but we must have at least 3 feet on the ground." "Probably closer to 4 with the drifts," Mike agreed, "but the real issue will be the roads. Plows won't get to these back roads until they've cleared the highways and main streets. Could be another day or 2. Catherine absorbed this information without visible distress. The storm has affected the entire eastern seaboard. Boston is at a standstill too, according to the radio reports. My meetings would have been cancelled, regardless of where I was. Something in her tone caught Mike's attention, a note of something almost like relief. As if the storm had provided an acceptable excuse for a pause she might have secretly desired, but would never have granted herself. Under normal circumstances, the makeshift coffee preparation proved more engaging than either expected. Mike demonstrated how to boil the water just short of bubbling, then add the ground beans, stirring gently before letting them steep. "My grandfather taught me this," he explained, carefully straining the resulting brew through a clean cloth into 2 mugs. He called it cowboy coffee. Not fancy, but it does the job. Catherine accepted her mug, inhaling the aroma with evident appreciation. "Sometimes the simplest methods are the most effective," she said after taking a cautious sip. "This is surprisingly good." They sat in companionable silence as dawn gradually brightened the snow-covered world outside. The ordinary sounds of the house, the crackle of the fire, the settling of old timbers, the distant drip of a faucet, seemed amplified in the absence of electronic hums and buzzes that typically filled modern life. "It's so quiet," Catherine remarked as if reading his thoughts. "I'd forgotten what true silence sounds like." Mike nodded. "First big snowstorm after I moved back here from college. That's what struck me most. The silence, like the whole world is holding its breath. It's unsettling," she admitted, "but also strangely peaceful." The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Tyler's arrival. He appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes still heavy-lidded but brightening at the sight of them. "Is there school today?" he asked, the question automatic despite the obvious answer. Mike smiled. "What do you think, bud? Take a look outside." Tyler moved to the window, pressing his face against the cold glass. "Whoa," he breathed, taking in the transformed landscape. "It's like we're on another planet." "A very cold one," Catherine added with a small smile. "Is your room warm enough? We can move your mattress down here if it's too cold upstairs." The question, so parental, so considerate, seemed to surprise her as much as it did Mike. Tyler, however, accepted the concern as natural. "I'm okay," he assured her. "I used all the blankets Dad gave me, and I wore my hat to bed like you suggested. My fish tank might be too cold, though." "Your fish tank," Mike repeated, suddenly alert. "I forgot about Nemo and friends. The tank heater runs on electricity." Tyler's expression turned worried. "Will they be okay?" Mike was already on his feet. "Let's bring the tank down here, close to the wood stove. The water will hold heat better than air, but we don't want it to get too cold." The next hour was devoted to a careful rescue operation. The 3 of them worked together to transport Tyler's 10-gallon aquarium from his bedroom to the living room, moving slowly to avoid spilling water or stressing the 3 colorful betta fish that were Tyler's pride and joy. Catherine surprised. Both Reynolds men with her practical approach, suggesting they wrap the tank in towels during transit to maintain temperature and using a turkey baster to aerate the water once it was repositioned near the wood stove. "How do you know about fish care?" Tyler asked as they watched the betters adjust to their emergency relocation. Catherine smiled. "My college roommate kept tropical fish. Very particular about water temperature and oxygen levels, some things you never forget." This glimpse into a younger, more ordinary Catherine intrigued Mike. He tried to imagine her as a college student, before the corporate success, before the Blackwell name became synonymous with technological innovation. Had she been driven, even, then? Had there been moments of typical youthful freedom, or had her path always been so singularly focused? As if sensing his thoughts, Catherine met his gaze over Tyler's head. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement perhaps that they were seeing new dimensions of each other in this strange, suspended time. The remainder of the morning was dedicated to practical matters. Without electricity, many routine. Tasks became challenges, requiring creativity and cooperation. Mike ventured outside to clear paths to the woodpile and the garage. Catherine organized their food supplies for maximum efficiency, and Tyler took responsibility for monitoring the radio for emergency updates. By mid-afternoon, a new development emerged. The battery-powered radio announced that emergency crews were making progress, clearing major roadways, and limited power restoration had begun in town centers. "They're saying downtown might get electricity back by tonight," Tyler reported, excitement coloring his voice. "But outlying areas could take longer." Mike nodded, unsurprised. "We're pretty far down the priority list out here. But that's still good news. Means they're making progress." "I should check if the landline is working," Catherine said. "If I can reach my office, I could at least touch base with my executive team." The phone proved functional, and Catherine disappeared into the spare room for what turned into an hour-long conversation with various members of her staff. When she emerged, her expression was a mix of relief and resignation. "Tokyo approved the manufacturing changes despite the disrupted meeting," she reported, accepting a mug of tea from Mike. "But there are complications with the Berlin expansion that I really need to address in person." "Roads won't be passable for at least another day," Mike reminded her. "And your car still needs parts that I can't get until shipping resumes." She nodded, cradling the warm mug between her palms. "I know. My assistant is working on alternatives, possibly sending a company helicopter once the weather clears completely. But even that won't be possible until tomorrow at the earliest." Tyler, who had been arranging a puzzle on the coffee table, looked up with visible disappointment. "You're leaving tomorrow?" Something flickered across Catherine's face. Regret, perhaps, or a more complex emotion that defied easy categorization. "I have responsibilities," she said gently. "People who depend on me." "We depend on Dad too," Tyler said, his young face solemn. "But he always finds time to do fun stuff with me." The innocent observation landed like a pebble in still water, sending ripples through the comfortable atmosphere they'd established. Catherine went very still, her eyes moving from Tyler to Mike and back again. "That's different," she finally said, her voice careful. "Your father's work is here. Mine requires travel, meetings, constant availability." "Why?" Tyler persisted with a child's directness. "Can't other people do some of it? Dad says delegation is the mark of a good boss." Mike intervened, sensing Catherine's discomfort. "Tyler, everyone's work is different. Ms. Blackwell runs a huge company with thousands of employees. It's not the same as our garage." "Actually," Catherine said slowly, "he's not entirely wrong." She set her mug down on the coffee table. "I could delegate more than I do. I've just never been particularly good at it. My father believed in maintaining personal control over every aspect of the business. I inherited that tendency along with the company. Mike recognized the admission for what it was, not just a response to Tyler's question, but a moment of genuine self-reflection. In the enforced pause created by the storm, Catherine Blackwell was considering aspects of her life that the constant motion of her normal routine might never have allowed her to examine. The afternoon transitioned into evening with another meal prepared on the wood stove. A hearty stew made from ingredients that needed to be used before they spoiled without refrigeration. As they ate by lantern light, the conversation flowed, with increasing ease, moving from practical matters to more personal topics. "Did you always want to be a mechanic?" Catherine asked Mike as they finished their meal. He considered the question while helping Tyler to a second serving. "Not always. In high school, I thought about engineering, had a scholarship offer from MIT, but then Dad got sick and the garage needed running." He shrugged. "Life happens. Do you regret it?" she asked, echoing his question from the night before. Mike glanced at Tyler, who was focused on his stew but clearly listening. "I used to sometimes, wondered what might have been, but now, no. This life gave me Tyler, gave me purpose. Hard to regret that." Catherine nodded slowly. "Purpose is underrated in our culture. We talk about success, achievement, advancement, but purpose is what sustains you when the external validation falls away." "Is that what the company is for you?" Mike asked. "Purpose." She hesitated, as if the question required more thought than she'd expected. "It was," she said finally. "At least it started that way. My father created Blackwell Innovations to develop medical technologies that could save lives. His brother had died from a heart condition that might have been treatable with the right device. That mission resonated with me from the beginning. But now," Mike prompted when she fell silent. Catherine sighed, setting down her spoon. "Now it's become about growth, market share, quarterly earnings. The board pushes for decisions that prioritize profit over innovation, expansion over refinement. Sometimes I wonder if my father would even recognize the company he founded." "Can't you change it back?" Tyler asked, rejoining the conversation. "You're the boss, right?" Catherine smiled, a hint of wistfulness in her expression. "It's not quite that simple, unfortunately. Publicly traded companies answer to shareholders, and shareholders want returns on their investments. Changing direction requires convincing a lot of people that doing the right thing is also the profitable thing." "But not impossible," Mike suggested. "No," she agreed thoughtfully. "Not impossible. Just challenging." She straightened, slightly, as if physically shaking off the weight of the topic. "Enough about corporate politics. Tyler, tell me more about that science project you mentioned. The one with renewable energy?" The evening progressed with games, conversation, and an increasing sense of comfort in each other's company. Tyler eventually fell asleep on the couch, his head resting against Catherine's shoulder in an unconscious display of trust that clearly affected her. Mike watched as she carefully shifted to accommodate the sleeping child, her expression softening. In a way he hadn't yet witnessed. "He's exhausted," she whispered, glancing down at Tyler's peaceful face. "Should we wake him to go upstairs?" Mike shook his head. "Let him sleep here. It's warmer anyway." He draped an extra blanket over his son, tucking it around his small frame with practiced movements. "I'll carry him up later if the fire dies down too much." With Tyler asleep, a different quality entered the atmosphere between the two adults, a quieter, more intimate energy that acknowledged something growing between them that neither had anticipated. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, Tyler's sleeping form between them, speaking in low voices to avoid disturbing him. "Thank you," Catherine said after a comfortable silence, for all of this. The hospitality, the kindness. I'm not sure what I would have done if your garage hadn't been open that night. You'd have figured something out, Mike replied. You strike me as someone who always does. She smiled faintly. Perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to. Her eyes moved around the humble living room, taking in the worn furniture, the family, photos, the evidence of a life built on modest means, but rich in more significant ways. This experience has been enlightening. How so? Mike asked, curious about her perspective. Catherine considered her words carefully. I've spent most of my adult life in spaces designed to impress. Corner offices, five-star hotels, exclusive restaurants, places where every detail communicates status and power. She gestured to encompass the room. There's none of that here, but there's warmth, security, authenticity. It's refreshing. Simple doesn't mean lesser, Mike observed. No, she agreed. If anything, it's clarifying. Stripping away the excess reveals what's genuinely important. She glanced down at Tyler, her expression thoughtful. Like your relationship with your son. There's something beautiful about its directness, its priority in your life. He's my heart, Mike said simply. Catherine nodded, understanding evident in her eyes. I envy that clarity of purpose. It's not too late, you know, Mike said, quietly, to find that for yourself, beyond the company, I mean. She looked at him, really looked, as if seeing past the surface to something deeper. Perhaps you're right. A moment passed between them, charged with possibility. Then she smiled, breaking the tension. Though I should probably start with something manageable, like finding those packed-away clocks, before contemplating major life changes. One step at a time, Mike agreed, returning her smile. Good mechanical practice. Fix the timing belt before worrying about repainting the car. She laughed softly, the sound warming the space between them. Is there a car metaphor for every life situation in your world? Pretty much, he admitted with a grin. Hazard of the profession. Their conversation continued, moving from topic to topic with increasing ease, discovering unexpected common ground despite their different backgrounds. Catherine spoke of her childhood in Boston, the weight of family expectations, her struggle to be taken seriously in the male-dominated tech industry. Mike shared stories of growing up in the garage, learning at his father's side, the communities formed around classic cars and the people who loved them. As the night deepened around the isolated house, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, something new was taking shape. A connection neither had sought, but both were beginning to value. In the forced pause created by the storm, two people from vastly different worlds were discovering the surprising ways their paths aligned. Morning arrived with a dramatic change. Tyler, who had eventually been carried to his bed in the early hours, came bounding down the stairs with news. The plow came through, he announced, practically vibrating with excitement. And I think I saw lights on at the Jackson place down the road. Power might be coming back. Mike and Catherine, who had been preparing another wood stove breakfast, exchanged glances, hers reflecting a complex mix of emotions, his quietly accepting what her expression confirmed. Their unexpected sanctuary was about to reconnect with the outside world. That's great news, buddy, Mike said, keeping his tone light for Tyler's benefit. Why don't you get dressed and we'll head to the garage after breakfast, see what shape things are in there. While Tyler raced back upstairs, Catherine moved to the window, gazing out at the plowed road visible in the distance. Your company helicopter will probably be able to land now, Mike observed, joining her at the window. She nodded without turning. Probably, if not today, then certainly tomorrow. A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Catherine turned to face him. This isn't how I expected this week to go, she said, a hint of wry humor in her voice. Getting stranded in a blizzard rarely makes it into anyone's itinerary, Mike agreed with a small smile. No, she conceded, but I'm finding myself strangely grateful for it. Her expression grew more serious. These past days, they've given me perspective I didn't know I needed. Before Mike could respond, the lights suddenly flickered on, the refrigerator hummed to life, and the heating system began its familiar whir. Electricity, and with it the normal functioning of modern life, had returned. Perfect timing, Catherine said, but her expression suggested she didn't entirely believe her own words. After a breakfast that felt more hurried than their previous meals, despite the restored convenience of electric appliances, the three of them made their way to the garage. The plowed road made the journey considerably easier, though massive snowbanks on either side created a canyon-like effect that Tyler found endlessly fascinating. Inside the garage, everything appeared intact. The power was working here too, bringing the space back to its functional state. The Rolls-Royce sat where they had left it, still regal despite its temporary disability. While Tyler explored the snow structures outside, now deemed safe with the storms passing, Mike and Catherine stood beside the vintage car, their conversation returning to practical matters. I can order the parts today, Mike explained, but delivery will still take time. The timing belt is specialized for this model. 3 days minimum, probably closer to a week with the backlog this storm will have created. Catherine nodded, her hand resting lightly on the car's polished fender. I'll make arrangements to have it transported to a Boston service center. They'll likely have the parts in stock or can get them faster. The decision made perfect sense from a practical standpoint, but Mike felt an irrational disappointment at this logical solution. He had looked forward to the restoration work, to bringing this magnificent machine back to life with his own hands. More than that, he had harbored a quiet hope that the repair might extend Catherine's stay, providing more time for what? Exactly. He wasn't entirely sure. That's probably more efficient, he conceded, keeping his tone professional. Catherine studied him, her perceptiveness evident. You wanted to fix it yourself. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. It's not often I get to work on something like this, and your father clearly cared for it. I would have treated it with the same respect. Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a decision forming. The Boston Service Center makes the most logical sense, she said slowly. But I find I'm not feeling particularly logical about this car. It was important to my father. He would have preferred someone who understands its value to handle the repairs, not just a corporate service department working from maintenance manuals. Mike felt a spark of hope. Are you saying? I'm saying I'd like you to fix it, she confirmed, even if that means waiting a little longer. Before Mike could respond, his phone rang, the landline in the office, its shrill tone cutting through the moment. He excused himself to answer it, returning moments later with news. That was Bill Thompson from Town Emergency Services. He reported. They're doing wellness checks on outlying properties. Also said the helicopter landing zone at the high school has been cleared, if you need it. Catherine nodded, her executive persona visibly reasserting itself as connections to the outside world were restored. I should call my assistant, arrange transportation. Yet she didn't move toward the office, instead remaining beside the Rolls-Royce, her hand still resting protectively on its gleaming surface. Dad, Catherine, come look at this. Tyler's voice called from outside. They found him standing beside an impressive snow fort he had constructed against one of the garage's outer walls. It's big enough for all of us, he announced proudly. Want to try it out? The childish invitation hung in the air between them, an opportunity to extend this strange, suspended time just a little longer, to remain in the simpler world the storm had temporarily created. Catherine glanced at her watch, then at the garage where the phone awaited, then back at Tyler's hopeful face. Something in her expression shifted, as if a decision was being made that went far beyond whether to enter a child's snow fort. "I'd love to see inside," she said, crouching down to peer into the entrance Tyler had created. "It looks very impressive." Tyler beamed, gesturing for them both to follow him. "It took me forever to get the roof right. Dad, you go in first to make sure it's safe." Mike obliged, awkwardly maneuvering his adult frame through the entrance, settling onto the packed snow floor inside. Catherine followed with surprising agility, tucking herself into the small space until the three of them were huddled together in Tyler's creation, sunlight filtering through the snow walls in a soft blue glow. "It's amazing, Tyler," Catherine said, genuine admiration in her voice. "A perfect shelter." "Dad taught me how to build them," Tyler explained, pride evident in every word. "He says knowing how to create shelter is one of the most important skills a person can have." "Your father is a wise man," Catherine said, meeting Mike's eyes in the ethereal blue light. In that moment, surrounded by walls of snow yet feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, Mike Reynolds realized that something extraordinary had happened during this storm, something that might just change all their lives in ways none of them could have predicted when that Rolls-Royce first appeared through the blizzard. Catherine's phone, which had finally reconnected to service, chimed with an incoming message. The sound was like a clock striking midnight in a fairy tale, signaling the end of a magical interlude. Reality, with all its complications and separations, was reasserting itself. But as they emerged from Tyler's snow fort, blinking in the bright winter sunlight, Mike noticed that Catherine didn't immediately check the message. Instead, she stood gazing at the garage, the house beyond it, and the two people who had shared their home and lives with her during the storm. "I need to make those calls," she finally said, brushing snow from her borrowed coat. "But first, I'd like to discuss a proposition with you, Mike. Something I've been considering since yesterday." Tyler, sensing adult matters about to be discussed, announced his intention to add a second room to his snow fort and moved a few yards away to resume his construction project. Alone now, Mike and Catherine faced each other, their breath visible. In the cold air, the vast difference in their worlds temporarily reduced to the distance between them in the snow-covered yard. "What kind of proposition?" Mike asked, curiosity piqued. Catherine squared her shoulders, her business persona emerging but tempered now with something more personal. "Blackwell Innovations has a philanthropic division that provides grants for small business modernization in underserved communities, particularly businesses that provide essential services and demonstrate exceptional quality and integrity." Mike blinked, trying to follow this unexpected turn in the conversation. "Okay. I've been observing your operation," she continued, her tone matter-of-fact, but her eyes conveying deeper meaning. "You provide vital services to this community. Your work is exceptional, but your equipment is outdated. Your facilities in need of renovation." "Can't argue with that assessment," Mike acknowledged with a wry smile. "But what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Catherine said carefully, "that Reynolds Auto Repair would be an ideal candidate for one of our development grants. Significant funding for modernization, expansion, whatever you think would best serve your community and sustain your business." Mike stared at her, processing the implications. "That's generous. But I'm not looking for charity, Catherine." "It's not charity," she replied firmly. "It's investment in a business that deserves to thrive, in a community that needs the services you provide, in a vision of quality work that my father would have respected." She paused, then added more softly, "And perhaps in a connection I'd like to explore further if you're amenable." The last part hung between them, an acknowledgement of the undeniable pull they'd both felt during their forced proximity. "You're heading back to Boston," Mike pointed out, not unkindly. "Back to board meetings and global operations." How would that even work? Catherine smiled, something determined and yet vulnerable in her expression. I'm not entirely sure, she admitted, but I find I'm suddenly very motivated to figure it out. Before Mike could respond, Tyler's excited voice cut through the moment. Dad, the snowplow made another pass, and there's a big black car coming up the road. The sleek black SUV crawled up the freshly plowed driveway, its tinted windows revealing nothing of its occupants. Tyler stood transfixed, his snow fort forgotten as the vehicle came to a stop beside the garage. Mike recognized it immediately for what it was: corporate transportation, the kind that ferried executives between important meetings and private airports. Your ride, I'm guessing, he said to Catherine, trying to keep his tone neutral despite the sinking feeling in his chest. She nodded, her expression complicated. My assistant tends to be efficient. The driver's door opened, and a young woman emerged, impeccably dressed in a tailored coat and sensible boots, clearly chosen for the snowy conditions. She carried a tablet in one hand and surveyed the property with the quick assessment of someone accustomed to managing logistics. Ms. Blackwell, she called, striding toward them. Thank goodness you're all right. We've been so worried. Catherine straightened imperceptibly, her posture shifting as she stepped back into her role as CEO. Hello, Diane. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. The assistant stopped a respectful distance away, her gaze moving curiously between Catherine, Mike, and Tyler. The helicopter is standing by at the high school landing zone. The pilot says we have a weather window for the next few hours before the next system moves in. Thank you, Catherine replied. And the Berlin situation? Stabilized for now. Mr. Richardson has been handling it, but they're anxious for your input. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Mike watched as Catherine absorbed this information, noting the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes, the only outward sign of the weight settling back onto her shoulders. The woman standing beside him now was different from the one who had played Monopoly by lantern light and huddled in a child's snow fort just hours earlier. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was happening before his eyes. Catherine Blackwell, stranded traveler, becoming once again Catherine Blackwell, CEO. Tyler approached cautiously, stopping beside his father. Are you leaving now? He asked Catherine, disappointment evident in his voice. She looked down at him, her expression softening. It seems that way, Tyler, but I meant what I said about your snow fort. It's truly impressive engineering. Diane cleared her throat, delicately. Miss Blackwell, I've brought the items you requested. She gestured toward the SUV. Your spare laptop, fresh clothes, and the documents for the Tokyo deal. Thank you, Diane, Catherine said. Would you give us a moment, please? The assistant nodded and retreated to the SUV, her efficiency apparent even in this simple action. When she was out of earshot, Catherine turned back to Mike and Tyler. I need to go, she said simply. Mike nodded, understanding despite his disappointment. You have responsibilities. I do, she agreed, but that doesn't change anything I said earlier. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a business card, offering it to Mike. My private number is on the back. Not my assistant's line, not my office, my direct cell. Call me about the grant proposal, or... She hesitated, then continued with quiet determination. About anything else you might want to discuss. Mike accepted the card, turning it over to see the handwritten number on the back. And the Rolls-Royce. I still want you to fix it, she confirmed. Not just because of your skill, though that's certainly part of it, but because I think... She glanced at Tyler, then back to Mike. I think I might need a reason to come back to Vermont occasionally. The implication hung in the air between them, a tentative thread connecting their vastly different worlds. I'd like that, Mike said simply. Catherine smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Good. She crouched down to Tyler's level. Thank you for sharing your home with me, Tyler, and for teaching me about model cars and snow forts. I've learned more from you than you might realize. Tyler, never one for emotional restraint, surprised them both by throwing his arms around her in a spontaneous hug. Will you come back to see if the car works when Dad fixes it? Catherine returned the embrace, her eyes meeting Mike's over the boy's shoulder. Absolutely. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. The goodbye that followed was necessarily brief. A practical woman like Catherine Blackwell wouldn't indulge in drawn-out farewells. There was a handshake with Mike that lingered just a moment longer than convention required, a final wave to Tyler, and then she was sliding into the SUV beside her assistant, the vehicle pulling away down the plowed driveway, leaving father and son standing in the snow. I liked her, Tyler declared as they watched the SUV disappear around the bend. Mike smiled, his hand still holding the business card with its handwritten number. Yeah, buddy, I did too. 3 weeks passed. Winter maintained its grip on Vermont, though the historic blizzard gave way to more typical seasonal weather. Life at Reynolds Auto Repair resumed its normal rhythm. School for Tyler, work for Mike, the ordinary challenges of running a small business in a rural community. The Rolls-Royce remained in the garage, now partially disassembled as Mike worked methodically through its needs. The timing belt had arrived a week after the storm, special ordered from a distributor in England. Other parts followed: the carburetor rebuild kit, new fuel lines, the radiator hose. Mike devoted every spare moment to the restoration, working with a precision and care that went beyond his usual high standards. Tyler took to checking the mail each day after school, hoping for something from Catherine. Mike pretended not to notice, just as he pretended not to think about her during quiet moments in the garage, when his hands were busy with the Rolls-Royce's engine and his mind was free to wander. He hadn't called the number on the business card. Not because he didn't want to, but because some part of him wondered if their connection had been a product of extraordinary circumstances, a temporary alignment created by the storm and isolation that might not survive in the harsh light of normal reality. Then, exactly 23 days after Catherine Blackwell had driven away in a black SUV, everything changed again. Mike was in the garage, carefully reinstalling the Rolls-Royce's timing belt, when he heard the distinctive sound of tires on gravel. Customers were rare these days, the winter economy having its usual dampening effect on non-essential automotive services, so any arrival was noteworthy. He straightened, wiping his hands on a shop rag as he moved toward the front of the garage. Through the windows, he saw not the expected local pickup truck or family sedan, but a gleaming black Tesla, sleek, modern, unmistakably expensive. The driver's door opened, and Catherine Blackwell emerged, dressed in a tailored coat that somehow managed to be both practical for Vermont winter and elegantly professional. Her hair was pulled back in its usual style, but there was something different about her. A lightness, perhaps, or a determination that hadn't been there before. Mike stepped outside, unable to prevent the smile that spread across his face at the sight of her. "You didn't call," he said by way of greeting. "Neither did you," she countered, approaching with confident strides. They stood facing each other, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. "I wasn't sure if what happened during the storm was real," Mike admitted, "or if it was just something created by unusual circumstances." Catherine tilted her head slightly. "I've been wondering the same thing," she confessed, "which is why I decided empirical testing was required." Empirical testing? A controlled experiment to determine if our connection exists independent of blizzard conditions, she explained, a hint of humor in her voice. "I've cleared my calendar for the next 48 hours. No assistance, no corporate emergencies, no scheduled interruptions." Mike felt something warm unfurl in his chest. That's quite a commitment for someone who runs a global company. I've been making some changes, she said, her tone turning more serious. Delegating more responsibility, restructuring my role. The board wasn't thrilled initially, but they're coming around to my perspective. Which is, that Blackwell Innovations needs to return to its original mission, developing technologies that genuinely improve lives, not just products that generate profits. And that doing so requires leadership that isn't burning out from micromanagement and constant crisis response. Mike nodded, understanding the significance of what she was describing, not just a scheduling adjustment, but a fundamental shift in how she approached her life and work. "And the other thing you mentioned?" he asked. "The grant for the garage?" Catherine smiled. "I have the paperwork in the car, but I wanted to speak with you about that in person. It's important to me that you understand this isn't charity or some attempt to impress you." "I never thought it was," Mike assured her. "Reynolds Auto Repair provides an essential service to this community," she continued. "You maintain vehicles that people depend on for work, school, medical appointments. You do it with exceptional quality and integrity. That's exactly the kind of business our grant program was designed to support." Mike considered this, appreciating her directness. "And is this grant typically delivered personally by the CEO?" A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "That's a separate matter. Entirely." "Is it?" he asked, stepping closer. "Yes," she said firmly. "The grant is about recognizing the value of your business. My presence here is about—" She hesitated, then finished simply, "us." The word hung between them, small but significant. "Us," Mike repeated, testing the sound of it. "I like that." Catherine's expression softened. "Good. Now is the car ready? I thought perhaps we could take it for a test drive once you've completed the repairs." Mike grinned. "Almost. Another hour should do it. Tyler will be thrilled to see you. He's been checking the mail every day." It brought him something," Catherine said, reaching into her coat pocket and withdrawing a small box. She opened it to reveal a perfect miniature replica of the Silver Cloud II, exact in every detail, right down to the midnight blue paint. "I had it custom made. Thought it might be a worthy addition to his collection." The thoughtfulness of the gesture struck Mike deeply. Catherine Blackwell, with all her wealth and power, had remembered not just him, but his son, had considered what might bring joy to a child she'd known for just 3 days during a snowstorm. "He'll love it," Mike said, his voice rough with sudden emotion. "But not as much as he'll love seeing you." Catherine met his gaze, her expression unguarded. "And you? Are you glad to see me?" Instead of answering with words, Mike closed the remaining distance between them. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, he raised one hand to her cheek. When she leaned into his touch rather than away, he bent his head and kissed. Her gently at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. When they finally parted, Catherine's eyes remained closed for a moment, a smile playing at her lips. "I'll take that as a yes," she murmured. Mike laughed softly. "Definitely yes." Inside the garage, he showed her the progress on the Rolls-Royce, explaining each repair and improvement with the passion of someone who genuinely loved his work. Catherine listened attentively, asking questions that revealed both her technical knowledge and her appreciation for his craftsmanship. "You've done beautiful work," she said, running her fingers along the polished fender. "My father would have approved." "High praise," Mike acknowledged. "I wanted to do it right, not just because it's a remarkable car, but because it matters to you." Catherine nodded, emotion briefly tightening her throat. "Thank you," she said, simply. They were still discussing the car when Tyler burst through the side door, his school day complete. He stopped short at the sight of Catherine, his face lighting up with unrestrained joy. "You came back!" he exclaimed, dropping his backpack and rushing forward. Catherine crouched to meet him, accepting his enthusiastic hug with obvious pleasure. "I promised I would, didn't I? And I brought you something." She presented the model car, watching his expression shift from excitement to awe. "It's exactly like the real one," he breathed, turning the miniature Rolls-Royce in his hands, even the little flying lady on the hood. "Spirit of Ecstasy," Catherine corrected gently. "That's her official name." Tyler looked up from the model to the real car, then to Catherine. "Are you staying this time, or do you have to rush back for important meetings?" Catherine glanced at Mike, something warm and promising in her eyes. "I'm staying for a couple of days," she said, "and I'll be coming back regularly. Your dad is going to be helping Blackwell Innovations with a special project." "What kind of project?" Tyler asked, curiosity piqued. Mike stepped forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Remember how we talked about modernizing the garage? Getting new equipment, maybe expanding?" Tyler nodded eagerly. "With a real waiting room and everything?" "Exactly," Mike confirmed. "Ms. Blackwell's company is going to help make that happen. And in return," Catherine added, "your dad is going to advise us on developing more serviceable medical equipment, devices that can be repaired rather than replaced, extending their useful life in communities that can't afford constant upgrades." Tyler looked between them, his young face thoughtful. "So, you'll be working together? Like partners?" Mike and Catherine exchanged glances, a wealth of meaning passing between them. "Yes," Catherine said, her voice soft but certain. "Like partners." As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows through the garage windows, the three of them stood beside the partially restored Rolls-Royce, a billionaire tech CEO, a small-town mechanic, and a boy who had somehow helped bridge their worlds during a historic blizzard. Outside, winter still held Vermont in its grip, but inside Reynolds Auto Repair, something new was taking root. Something built on mutual respect, unexpected connection, and the simple human truth that sometimes the most valuable repairs aren't made to machines at all, but to the hearts of those who tend them. 6 months later, the transformation of Reynolds Auto Repair was complete. The old building remained, its character preserved, but now it housed state-of-the-art equipment, an expanded service area, and the promised waiting room, comfortable but not pretentious, in keeping with Mike's vision. A small team of local mechanics had been hired and trained, allowing the business to serve more customers without sacrificing quality. The Rolls-Royce had long since been restored to perfect running condition, but it remained a frequent visitor to the garage. Every few weeks, it would appear in the driveway, sometimes with Catherine behind the wheel, sometimes driven by her newly hired local assistant who managed her Vermont affairs. Tyler had adapted to these changes with the resilience of childhood, accepting as perfectly natural both the garage's expansion and Catherine's increasing presence in their lives. He proudly gave tours of the new facility to his friends, explaining the sophisticated diagnostic equipment with the easy confidence of someone born to the trade. And on weekends, when Catherine joined them for family outings, he chatted with her about everything from school projects to the latest additions to his model car collection, which now occupied an entire shelf in his bedroom. For Mike and Catherine, the path forward had not been without challenges. Her role at Blackwell Innovations, though restructured, still demanded significant time and attention. His commitment to the garage and the community it served couldn't simply be set aside. The distance between Vermont and Boston sometimes felt insurmountable, especially during busy periods when days might pass with only brief phone conversations to maintain their connection. But they were figuring it out day by day with the same determination that had characterized their initial meeting in the middle of a blizzard. Catherine had purchased a small property not far from Mike's house. Nothing ostentatious, just a comfortable place that was truly hers rather than a corporate accommodation. Mike had begun traveling to Boston occasionally, originally to consult on the serviceability project, increasingly to simply be where she was. On this particular evening, with summer fading into the first hints of autumn, they sat on the porch of Mike's house, watching as Tyler demonstrated his soccer skills in the yard. The Rolls-Royce was parked in the driveway beside Mike's truck, the contrast between the vehicles somehow symbolic of the bridge they continued to build between their worlds. The Boston office called earlier, Catherine mentioned, her tone casual. The board approved the expansion of the serviceability initiative. We'll be implementing the new design standards across all our medical device lines. Mike nodded appreciatively. That's going to make a real difference for rural hospitals and clinics, equipment that can be maintained locally instead of requiring specialized technicians from the city. That's huge. It was your insight that made it possible, she reminded him, seeing the mechanical systems through a repairer's eyes rather than just a designer's. He shrugged modestly. It's just common sense. Things that can be fixed last longer than things that can't. Catherine smiled, reaching for his hand. A philosophy that applies to more than just machines. Mike interlaced his fingers with hers, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from strangers thrown together by circumstance to partners in multiple senses of the word. Definitely more than just machines, he agreed. As the evening deepened around them, Tyler's soccer demonstration gave way to firefly catching, his laughter echoing across the yard. The Rolls-Royce gleamed in the fading light, restored to its former glory through careful hands and patient work. And on the porch of a modest Vermont home, a mechanic and a billionaire continued the ongoing process of building something neither had expected to find. A connection that, like the finest engines, was built to last. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.